Throughout the Bible, 5 giants stand out as the most feared, the most powerful, and the most influential. Throughout the Bible, 5 giants stand out as the most feared, the most powerful, and the most influential. Their names echo through Scripture: the Nephilim, the Anakim, the Rephaim, Og of Bashan, and Goliath of Gath. Each one carried a reputation so great that entire armies hesitated at the sight of them. These giants weren't just tall, they represented fear, dominance, and overwhelming opposition. Yet every one of them appears in Scripture for a reason far deeper than their size. Their stories reveal how God's people responded when faced with impossible odds. Some responded with fear and retreated. Others stepped forward with unshakable faith. These 5 giants expose the difference between human strength and divine power. They remind us that size never decides the outcome. Faith does. Before we explore each giant, we must understand why Scripture highlights them at all. Their stories aren't about fear. They're about courage, obedience, and the God who overcomes every giant. The first and most mysterious giants in the Bible are the Nephilim, mentioned before the flood. Genesis describes them as mighty men of old, men of renown, feared for their strength and influence. Their presence marked a world spiraling into violence, corruption, and spiritual rebellion. Their presence marked a world spiraling into violence, corruption, and spiritual rebellion. Their reputation spread so widely that even after the flood, their memory terrified nations. The Nephilim represented a world where human pride tried to rival the purposes of God. Their rise was a symptom of a deeper problem: humanity drifting far from God's design. Violence filled the earth, and the giants stood at the center of that growing darkness. Their influence was so great that Scripture marks their presence as a turning point in history. The flood was God's response to a world overwhelmed by corruption, fear, and spiritual decay. But even after the flood, echoes of the Nephilim would reappear in the land of Canaan. Their legacy sets the foundation for every giant Israel would face in the centuries ahead. After the flood, one of the most feared groups of giants to rise in Canaan were the Anakim. Their name means long-necked or tall ones, a reminder of their overwhelming size. When Moses sent 12 spies into the land, it was the Anakim who struck fear into their hearts. The spies reported, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes," revealing the scale of these giants. The Anakim lived in fortified cities, dominating regions like Hebron, Sheshai, and Talmai. Their presence caused an entire generation of Israel to retreat in fear and wander the wilderness. But when Joshua rose to lead, he confronted the Anakim head-on with unwavering faith. Scripture records that Joshua drove the Anakim out of the hill country, breaking their strongholds. Only a few survived, escaping to cities like Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. These survivors would later give rise to other giants, including Goliath himself. The Anakim remind us that fear can delay destiny, but faith can reclaim what was lost. Their story sets the stage for the battles that would define Israel's courage for generations. Among the greatest giants mentioned in Scripture, the Rephaim stand as one of the most mysterious and widespread. They appear in Genesis, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Samuel, showing their long-lasting influence. The Rephaim were known for their immense size and strength, feared by every nation around them. Their territory stretched across Bashan, Moab, Ammon, and the valleys surrounding Canaan. Some Rephaim were so large that their beds measured over 13 feet in length. They were considered remnants of an older world, survivors of ancient giant bloodlines. When Israel entered the land, the Rephaim were among the first giants they encountered. Their presence created fear, but God repeatedly reminded Israel that no giant could stand against him. In battle after battle, the Rephaim fell before warriors empowered by faith, not size. Even David's mighty men fought and defeated descendants of the Rephaim in later generations. Their downfall proved that no ancient power, no matter how feared, could resist God's purpose. The Rephaim remind us that every stronghold, no matter how ancient, can fall when God steps in. Among the 5 greatest giants in the Bible, none carried a reputation as massive as Og, king of Bashan. Og ruled over a vast territory in Bashan, a region known for fortified cities and ancient giant strongholds. Scripture highlights Og's size by describing his bed, over 13 feet long and made of solid iron. This detail wasn't random. It emphasized the overwhelming scale of the king Israel was about to face. Og was the last survivor of the Rephaim kings, a remnant of an ancient giant lineage. His army was vast, his cities fortified, and his presence struck fear into every surrounding nation. But when Israel approached, God told Moses, "Do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hand." With that promise, Israel confronted Og in a decisive battle that would reshape the region. Despite his size and strength, Og fell, proving that no giant is beyond God's reach. Israel captured 60 fortified cities, each one a testimony to the victory God provided. Og's defeat marked the end of an era, the fall of the last great giant king of the ancient world. His story reminds us that no matter how great the opposition, God's promise is always greater. Of all the giants in the Bible, none is more famous than Goliath of Gath, the warrior who halted an entire nation. Goliath stood over 9 feet tall, covered in bronze from head to toe, radiating intimidation. His spear was like a weaver's beam, and the iron tip alone weighed more than many swords. For 40 days, Goliath stepped forward and challenged Israel, demanding a champion to face him. But no warrior moved. Even seasoned soldiers trembled at the sight of him. Then came David, a young shepherd with no armor, no sword, and no fear. David declared that the battle belonged to the Lord, not to the strongest or the tallest. With a single stone, he struck Goliath in the forehead, dropping the giant instantly. The fall of Goliath sent shockwaves through the Philistine army, turning confidence into panic. Israel surged forward, energized by a victory that proved faith outweighs size. Goliath's defeat became a symbol for every believer facing impossible odds. His story reminds us that no giant is too great when God stands with those who trust him. Goliath was not the only giant from Gath. Scripture reveals he had powerful brothers who also terrified Israel. These giants were part of the Rephaim lineage, survivors of ancient giant bloodlines that endured for generations. One of them was Ishbi-Benob, whose spear weighed hundreds of shekels and nearly killed David in battle. But Abishai, one of David's mighty men, struck him down before the giant could deliver the final blow. Another giant Saph confronted Israel and fell in battle against one of David's elite warriors. A third giant, Lami, was described as the brother of Goliath, carrying a spear like a weaver's beam. He too was defeated, proving that Goliath's strength was not unique among his family. The final giant was a man of great stature with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. He mocked Israel just as Goliath once did, but Jonathan, David's nephew, struck him down. These victories showed that the courage David displayed did not die with him. It spread to the next generation. Each giant from Gath fell not to size or strength, but to warriors who trusted in God's power. Their defeat marked the end of the giant threat in Philistine territory, closing a legendary chapter in Scripture. Throughout Israel's history, giants appeared at critical moments, testing the courage and faith of God's people. The first major confrontation came when the 12 spies saw the Anakim in Canaan and retreated in fear. Their report caused an entire generation to doubt God's promise and wander the wilderness for 40 years. Later, under Joshua's leadership, Israel finally faced the giants head-on and drove them from the hill country. In Bashan, Israel confronted Og, the last great giant king, and defeated him despite his overwhelming power. Generations later, David faced Goliath, the champion of Gath, and defeated him with a single stone. This victory ignited a new era of courage, inspiring Israel to confront the remaining giants of Gath. This victory ignited a new era of courage, inspiring Israel to confront the remaining giants of Gath. David's mighty men later fought and killed Goliath's brothers, ending the giant threat once and for all. Each battle revealed the same truth. Giants fall when faith stands firm. Israel's victories were not about strength or numbers. They were about trusting the God who goes before them. Their story reminds us that every giant, no matter how intimidating, is powerless against God's purpose. If God is all-powerful, why did he allow giants to exist at all? Scripture reveals a deeper purpose. Giants expose the fear hidden in the hearts of God's people, revealing who trusted him and who didn't. They forced Israel to confront challenges far beyond human strength, pushing them toward divine dependence. Every giant encounter became a test of faith, separating those who believed God from those who doubted. Giants also revealed God's power, proving that victory comes from him, not from human ability. When David defeated Goliath, the message was clear. God uses the unlikely to overcome the impossible. Giants reminded Israel that the battle was never about size. It was about who they trusted. They also exposed spiritual pride in nations who relied on strength instead of righteousness. By defeating giants, Israel demonstrated that God's authority surpasses every earthly power. Each victory became a testimony that no force, physical or spiritual, can stand against God's purpose. Giants were allowed not to intimidate God's people, but to elevate their faith to a higher level. Their presence teaches us that God doesn't remove every giant. He empowers us to defeat them. The giants of the Bible were real, physical beings, but their stories carry a message that reaches far beyond ancient history. Very giant Israel faced mirrors the challenges we confront today: fear, doubt, intimidation, and overwhelming pressure. Just like the Anakim, some giants seem too deeply rooted to overcome. Like the Rephaim, some giants feel ancient, generational, and impossible to break. And like Goliath, some giants stand in our path loudly declaring that we will never win. But Scripture shows that giants fall not by strength, but by faith, obedience, and courage. David didn't defeat Goliath because he was skilled. He won because he trusted the God who fights for his people. Joshua didn't drive out the Anakim because Israel was strong, but because God had already promised victory. Every giant in Scripture fell the same way. When someone chose faith over fear, your giants may not have armor or spears, but they challenge you just as fiercely. The stories of these 5 giants remind us that no obstacle is too great when God stands with us. The giants of the Bible are gone, but the God who defeated them remains, and he still empowers his people today.